Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm going to talk today about some review papers that I've written with my colleague Svein Magnussen on lie detection, what works. And I think it's relevant to tell you something about the direction we're coming from. And both Svein and I, we have similar career trajectories in a way, where we began lab-based blue skies research and have migrated to eyewitness psychology eventually. And for the past 20 years in Svein's case and 10 years in mine, we've been expert witnesses in many cases. We lecture judges and lawyers on credibility and all sorts of issues to do with eyewitness psychology. And Svein previously and me now have been members of the Norwegian Criminal Cases Review Commission, so that we have exposure to real cases and how lawyers think, you might say. And also relevant, I think, is the Norwegian context, where it's a relatively small population, and so there's a relatively short distance between our ivory tower and the courtroom. So when Svein and I have been reading the literature on lie detection, our perspective has been to ask, well, okay, how does this finding, how does this research change what an expert witness can reasonably say in a court of law? And in one paper, we looked at the literature on non-verbal cues to lie detection. And of course, there's a very solid consensus amongst researchers that they are at best a poor guide. What we also spotted in the literature was that researchers still maintain some degree of optimism that we might be able to find some cues with different analysis. There might be some cues that haven't been found, but there's not really any research-based reason for this attitude. And indeed, Timothy Luke's simulations from 2019 suggest that even modest claims that non-verbal cues to deceit are faint, that's the sort of thing that is widespread in the literature, that even those might be overstated. Because when one incorporates publication bias into the data, the literature is actually consistent with there being no ability to detect lies on the basis of non-verbal cues. And one thing that we point out is that if one is unjustifiably optimistic, this might provide cover to people who are using really poor methods, or methods we know don't work. Let's have a look at the polygraph. I mean, there's lots of work on it, and there are solid reviews and meta-analyses, and to sum it all up, I mean, they show hit rates of about 70%. So on the basis of that, should one recommend that police use and the courts allow this method, that when it gets it wrong so much? The risk being that an investigation can proceed in the wrong direction, could be misled by a polygraph test giving the wrong result. Many jurisdictions don't allow the polygraph, including Norway, and there are logical and logistical challenges with polygraph and other body-based methods, as pointed out by Meyer and Verschwer, amongst others. So what about verbal methods detecting verbal lies? There are methods that systematically analyze the contents of statements, where criterion-based content analysis, CBCA, is the most widely used internationally, and they also score around 70%. And what we found reading this literature is what we called the percentage game, where there's lots of tweaking of methods going on, and to find out what increases the hit rate, what reduces it. But from the perspective of the question that we started with, that's exactly the sort of incremental improvement that doesn't really change what an expert should say in court. Because whether a method is getting it wrong, say 20% of the time or 25% of the time, we would advise great caution when considering such evidence. And although we all know there's a difference between statistical and practical significance, sometimes in the literature, the distinction is blurred because, of course, the polygraph and CBCA, they do distinguish significantly in a statistical sense between true statements and false statements. But that's a different question about whether they are immediately practically applicable. And Oberlader has two thorough meta-analyses of CBCA, and in the 2016 one, she and colleagues point out they look at a signal detection analysis and play around with their results and find that by reducing false alarms to 1%, which is presumably the sort of level that we would want, it actually means catching only 9% of lies. And reverse, if you turn the lever to the other end of the scale, if you determine to catch all lies, what you would also be doing, according to this analysis, is falsely categorizing 75% of true statements as lies. A more promising method, in our view, which has a restricted domain of application because the investigator needs to have independent information. So that's in contrast to the methods that I've talked about to now. But this method is called strategic use of evidence, closely related to tactical use of evidence. And the basic idea is that one asks one's witness or suspect to give a free account of what happened on Tuesday evening or whatever. And you don't tell them what information one has, what video or witness statements or DNA or whatever it might be, but one gradually presents it after they have said what their story is. And what meta-analysis by those authors there shows is that it produces statement evidence inconsistencies, which, as the person being interviewed adjusts their statement, for instance. It's a different kettle of fish to the other methods because it lends itself to being integrated into the investigative interview process. And this is rather than being a standalone method. What we would also say is that because one has so much digital evidence nowadays and other sorts of evidence, the proportion of cases where SUE can't be applied is actually lower than one thinks, because there's the evidence from mobile phones, and so we think that SUE and the related methods with the same sort of structure as SUE may be applied quite widely. So our practical conclusions are that using a lie detection method with a high error rate can misinform an investigation and take it off course. And unsubstantiated claims about the practical utility of lie detection methods can be a threat to the administration of justice. We all know how, I mean, in your countries as well, you must be getting this tsunami of methods that we know don't work and being told that by consultancies that they do work. And it's the possibility of misleading people if we're telling people that the methods that work around 70% of the time are more reliable than that. So, takk for meg means thank you for me in Norwegian, makes sense in Norwegian. And here are the references to the articles that I've based the talk on. And a popular science one as well. Thank you.